Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I lost my sight in a car accident when I was 25. The adjustment period was brutal, but learning to work with my guide dog changed everything. He became my eyes, my confidence, and my ticket back to independence. After months of training together, we developed a bond that went beyond the typical human-animal relationship. He knew when I needed to step up onto a curb before I even realized it was there. He could navigate around obstacles I never saw coming. Most importantly, he gave me back my freedom to go where I wanted, when I wanted. For years, I did most of my grocery shopping at the same Safeway location. It was about 15 minutes farther from my apartment than the closest store, but I knew every aisle by heart. The produce section was on the right when you walked in, dairy along the back wall, and frozen foods down the left side. The staff there had gotten to know me over the years. They would help me find items that had been moved or relocated, and they never made me feel like a burden. It was my safe space, my routine, and my guide dog, and I had it down to a science. That afternoon started like any other. The sun was warm on my face when we made our way through the automatic doors. My guide dog's harness felt familiar in my left hand, and I had my shopping list memorized. My teenage son had been asking for string cheese all week, so that was first on the agenda. We made our way down the main aisle toward the dairy section, weaving around other shoppers with practiced ease. The cheese aisle was usually pretty quiet during the afternoon hours. I positioned myself in front of what I knew was the string cheese section and started running my fingers along the packages, feeling for the brand my son preferred. That's when I heard heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer fast. Something about the aggressive pace made me instinctively command my guide dog to position himself between me and whatever was approaching. A woman's sharp voice suddenly cut through the air, demanding that I keep my dog away from her because she claimed to be deathly allergic to dogs. I was completely confused and asked her to repeat what she had said. She became even more aggressive, threatening that she would defend herself if I didn't keep my dog away from her. In all my years of having a guide dog, I had never encountered someone this hostile. Sure, there were occasional questions from curious kids or adults who didn't understand service animal laws, but this was different. This was aggressive. I tried to explain to the woman that it was a felony to injure a service animal, and I pointed out that I couldn't even see her to avoid her since I was blind. Her response was even more threatening when she told me to try her, making it clear she was serious about her threat. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. I could feel my guide dog tense up beside me. He sensed the hostility too, and I was genuinely worried this woman might actually try to hurt him. My dog had done nothing wrong. He was simply doing his job, helping me navigate the store and stay safe. I knew I had to get help. Carefully, I gave my guide dog the command to find the exit, and we made our way toward the front of the store. My hands were shaking by the time we reached the self-checkout area. I approached the cashier and asked her to please call a manager because I needed assistance. She could probably hear the stress in my voice because she immediately asked what was wrong. I explained that there was a woman in the cheese aisle who was threatening to hurt my guide dog, claiming she was allergic to dogs and wouldn't let me shop. Within minutes, a manager appeared beside me. He introduced himself when he got there and asked me to tell him what had happened. I explained the entire encounter while the cashier, who had witnessed part of it from her station, chimed in with details about what she had seen and heard. The cashier told the manager that she had seen the whole thing, describing how the woman was yelling at me and being really aggressive. She emphasized that my dog wasn't even near the woman and was just standing next to me, like service dogs do. The manager apologized for what had happened to me and said he would call the police and another manager to help me finish my shopping safely. The relief I felt was immediate. Finally, someone was taking this matter seriously. A second manager arrived and offered to personally help me finish my shopping while the first manager dealt with the situation. He assured me not to worry about anything and promised to make sure I got everything I needed while keeping me away from that woman. When we continued through the store, my anxiety slowly started to fade. The manager was patient and helpful, reading labels when I needed specific information and making sure my guide dog had plenty of space to work. When we finished shopping, they even opened a register just for me so I wouldn't have to wait in line with other customers. The manager explained that they wanted to make sure the rest of my visit went smoothly because this kind of behavior was absolutely unacceptable in their store. I was grateful, but I wondered what had happened to that woman. I got my answer during my next shopping trip the following week. The manager remembered me and told me about what had happened after I left. He said I would be happy to know that the woman was arrested and banned for life from all of their locations. When the police tried to escort her out, she actually spat on him and one of the officers. The cashier, who had witnessed the original incident, added that it was crazy, describing how the woman kept screaming about her allergies even when they were putting her in handcuffs. She mentioned that the officer had told the woman that threatening to harm a service animal was a serious crime, and her behavior toward me and the staff was completely out of line. The manager wanted me to know that the police officer had asked him to tell me they took my incident report very seriously. Apparently, this wasn't the woman's first run-in with law enforcement over similar issues. I learned that after I left that day, the woman had continued her rampage throughout the store, harassing other customers and staff members. When the police arrived, she became even more belligerent, refusing to leave peacefully and eventually assaulting 2 people in the process. She was banned from every location in the chain and faced multiple charges including threats against a service animal, disorderly conduct, and assault on both a store employee and a police officer. My family calls me when they need help dealing with difficult situations. Maybe it's because I work in insurance, or maybe it's just because I don't back down from bullies. When my phone rang that Tuesday afternoon and I heard my sister's shaky voice, I knew something was wrong. My sister had been going through a rough patch lately. Her husband had been laid off 3 months ago, and she was working double shifts at the hospital just to keep their heads above water. She's the gentle type, never wanting to cause trouble for anyone. That's probably why what happened next shook her up so badly. My sister called me asking for help. She told me she had just been in a car accident and some guy was calling her non-stop demanding money. I told her to slow down and explain what happened. She explained that she had been backing out of a parking space at the grocery store. A car was waiting behind her and the driver got impatient and tried to go around her while she was still backing up. She didn't see him and backed right into his side. I asked if anyone was hurt. She said no, thank God, just some dented metal on both cars. They had exchanged information and everything seemed fine at first. But then he started calling her constantly, saying it was all her fault and that he was going to sue her unless she paid him cash right away. I could hear her phone buzzing in the background even as we talked. She told me he had been calling every few minutes for the past 20 minutes. He was telling her that if she didn't meet him somewhere with cash, he was going to get lawyers involved. I told her not to give him a penny and that I would talk to him the next time he called. She asked if I would really do that, and I told her I would handle it and not to worry anymore. Sure enough, 5 minutes later her phone rang again. She answered and told him that her brother handles this kind of stuff for the family, and that I wanted to talk to him. When I got on the phone, I introduced myself as her brother and said I understood there had been an accident. The other driver immediately started yelling that there had been an accident all right, and that my sister had backed right into him, burning rubber and damaging his car real bad. I asked him to tell me exactly what happened from his perspective. He claimed he was sitting there perfectly still, maybe 50 feet back, just waiting like a normal person. Then he said my sister just floored it in reverse and slammed right into him. He complained that his car was all messed up and he had places to be. I asked if he wanted her to pay him directly. He said damn right he did. He claimed he didn't want to involve the police because he was trying to be nice to my family. But he threatened that if someone didn't pay him right away, he was going to have to follow the law and call the cops and sue everybody. That's when I smiled. This guy just made a big mistake. I told him that following the law was a great idea and that we should absolutely do that. He seemed confused and asked what I meant. I brought up the topic of following laws and asked him if the damage to his car was over $1,000. I could practically hear him rubbing his hands together through the phone as he eagerly said that it sure as hell was over 1,000. I then asked if he had filed a police report. He quickly said no, claiming like he told me before that he didn't want to get my family in trouble and just wanted to fix his car. I explained that if damages were over $1,000, then by law we had to report it. I told him I had his information and phone number and would get the report set up. My sister would give her statement and the police could contact him for his side of the story. He backtracked immediately, saying we didn't have to go through all that trouble and that it was an old car that probably wasn't even worth $1,000 in damage. I reminded him that he had just said it was definitely over 1,000. He got defensive and said he knew what he said, but we didn't need to get the law involved. I told him that I wanted to make sure our insurance didn't deny his claim, so I was going to go ahead and have a report done anyway. I said I would give the police his number, thanked him for calling, and hung up before he could respond. My sister looked at me with wide eyes and asked if that was smart. She wondered what would happen if he really did sue. I told her that guys like that are all bark and no bite and to trust me on this one. I immediately called the police non-emergency line and explained the situation. I told them my sister was a bit overwhelmed and not used to dealing with accidents. The officer who answered was really understanding and said he would call her to get her statement. He told me not to worry because they deal with this kind of thing all the time. The officer called my sister within 10 minutes. She gave him all the details, including the other driver's contact information, license plate, and insurance. She also told him about the phone calls demanding cash payment. The officer asked for my number because he wanted to talk to me about those phone calls. After I finished giving the officer my account of the conversation, he said he'd look into it and get back to me. I was expecting to wait a day or two, but about 5 minutes later my phone rang. It was the other driver, and he sounded panicked. He frantically told me he had changed his mind and wasn't going to make any claim or sue anyone. He begged me to tell the cops it was all a mistake and that he wasn't even there. I told him I couldn't do that because I wasn't about to lie to the police. He called me a real jerk and hung up on me. My sister called me an hour later, laughing for the first time all day. She said he had stopped calling and asked what I had done. I simply told her I had made sure the right people got involved. A few days later, I got a call from my buddy who works for the local police department. We went to high school together and he usually calls when he's got a funny story to share. He asked if my sister had gotten into some kind of mess with a crackhead. I asked what he was talking about, and he mentioned an accident in a parking lot. I realized he was talking about the report we had made a few days ago. He told me he knew about it because he had seen my family name on the report and decided to help out a bit. He said it turned out my sister's accident was the least of this guy's problems. I asked what he meant and he explained that, first off, the guy didn't even own the car he was driving. When they contacted the registered owner, they had no idea the car was even in our city, let alone that it had been in an accident. They thought their grandkid had it back in their hometown. I asked if he had stolen it, and my buddy said, not exactly. It turned out the grandkid's girlfriend had borrowed it to visit her mom in another city. When they asked the grandkid if he knew the other driver, he said that was the girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. I was surprised that her ex-boyfriend was driving the car, and my buddy said that was right, without permission from anyone. The grandparents were pretty upset about that. They agreed to let the girlfriend drive it back to them, after my buddy explained that, otherwise, he'd have to impound it until someone authorized could pick it up. I asked what happened to the guy who was harassing my sister. My buddy said that was where it got interesting. The guy had a bench warrant out of another county, which was why he really didn't want to talk to police officers. He was supposed to be in a completely different state. The girlfriend was more than happy to tell them exactly where to find him. I asked if they had arrested him, and my buddy said, oh yeah, they picked him up that same day. The other county was sending someone to transfer him back, but they were moving kinda slow. He would probably be there another week or so if I wanted to visit him in jail. I declined the invitation and said I was just glad it was taken care of. My buddy told me that my sister wouldn't have any more problems from this guy because he had bigger things to worry about now. After I hung up, I called my sister to give her the good news. She was quiet for a moment after I finished explaining everything. She asked if he had been driving a stolen car and trying to shake her down for money at the same time. I said that was pretty much the situation, and now he was sitting in jail instead of harassing innocent people. She said she was shocked that she had been so scared of him and thanked me for handling everything. I told her that's what family is for. Next time something like this happens, she should remember that people who make the biggest threats usually have the most to hide. The whole situation turned out better than I could have imagined. Not only did my sister not have to pay this scammer a dime, but he ended up behind bars where he belonged. My boss hired me after I got laid off from the shipyard across town. The marina business isn't exactly booming, but it's steady enough. We get the weekend warriors with their fishing boats, some locals with sailboats, and every now and then, someone with serious money rolls up in something that costs more than my house. One sunny Thursday afternoon, I was cleaning the fuel pumps when this massive boat came cruising into our little marina. It was one of those sleek, white beauties that probably cost $500,000. The engine was purring like a contented cat, and you could tell this thing was built for speed and comfort. The owner stepped off onto our dock, and right away, I could tell he thought he was hot stuff. Expensive sunglasses, polo shirt, the works. He had that swagger that screamed money and attitude. He walked up to me at the fuel station and barely looked in my direction. He told me to fill up his boat, not asking politely but demanding it like I was his personal servant. No please, no. How are you today? Just a straight order. I asked him if he wanted regular or premium fuel, and he snapped back that he wanted premium and to make it quick. His tone was rude and impatient, like my time didn't matter at all. I started pumping fuel into his tank while he stood there checking his phone and acting like I was invisible. The meter kept climbing, 20 gallons, 40, 60. This boat had a serious appetite for gas. When it finally clicked off at exactly 100 gallons, I did the math in my head. $4 a gallon for premium marine fuel meant this guy was about to drop $400. I walked over to where he was lounging in one of our plastic chairs and told him the total came to $400. Without even looking up from his phone, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. He peeled off 4 of them and handed them over like he was doing me some kind of favor. The bills felt crisp and new, like they'd just come from the bank. They looked perfectly normal to me, so I gave him his receipt and watched him stroll back to his boat like he owned the place. He thanked me for the service, but there was something sarcastic in the way he said it that rubbed me the wrong way. About a week later, my boss called me into his cramped office behind the marina store. He had this serious look on his face that made my stomach drop. He told me that the $100 bills from last Thursday, the ones that boat owner had paid with, were all fake. I asked if he was serious. He told me he was dead serious. He'd taken them to the bank that morning and they'd run them through their machine. Every single one came back. Counterfeit. Good fakes, but fake nonetheless. I've been working here 3 years and never had anything like this happen. I asked him what we could do now. He shook his head and explained that there was nothing we could do. The guy was long gone, no way to track him down. We were out $400 in fuel, and there was no getting it back. I felt terrible. Like somehow I'd let my boss down by not catching it. But those bills had looked so real, and the guy seemed legit with his expensive boat and all. Life went on, and I tried to forget about the whole thing. But it bothered me, knowing that someone had stolen from us and gotten away with it. I started paying extra attention to any large bills people paid with, checking them more carefully. Then, about 6 weeks later, I was organizing inventory in the store when I heard the familiar rumble of a big boat engine pulling up to our dock. I looked out the window and there it was. It was the same boat, the same guy. This time he was wearing different clothes, but I recognized that smug expression immediately. He walked into our little store and started browsing around like he'd never been here before in his life. My coworker Sarah was at the register and I quickly walked over to her. I whispered to her that she needed to call the police right away. She looked confused and asked me why. I pointed to the guy browsing our merchandise and explained quietly that he was the one who had paid with fake money last month. I told her we had to keep him from leaving this time. Sarah looked confused but nodded. She picked up the phone and dialed while I kept watching our uninvited guest. He was acting so casual, like he hadn't ripped us off just weeks ago. I remembered something my boss had told me about our docking policy. Anyone using our free dockage had to leave their name, phone number, and boat keys with us. It was supposedly for insurance reasons, but right now it seemed like the perfect way to keep this guy from disappearing again. He wandered over to the counter where I was standing and told me he'd like to dock there for a couple hours while he grabbed some lunch in town. I told him that was no problem, but explained that I needed to get his name and phone number for our records and that we'd need to hold his boat keys while he was docked there. He hesitated for just a second, and I could see him thinking it over. He asked if that was really necessary. I explained that it was our insurance policy because we'd had some issues with people leaving without paying docking fees. That seemed to satisfy him. He wrote down his information on our clipboard and handed over a set of keys, saying there I go and that he'd be back in a few hours. I told him to take his time, trying to sound casual. When he walked out toward town, I called my boss and explained what was happening. He told me the police were already on their way and that I should try to get the guy back to his boat before they arrived. About 20 minutes later, I saw 2 police cruisers pull into our parking lot. The officers got out and walked into the store, where my boss filled them in on the situation. My boss told me that the guy was probably in town getting food and asked if I could call him back to the marina. My boss handed me the clipboard with the guy's phone number. My hands were shaking a little when I dialed. The phone rang twice before he picked up and said hello. I told him I was calling from the marina and that we had a problem with his boat. He asked what kind of problem it was. I explained that his engine was smoking pretty bad and that it looked like something might be overheating. I told him he better get back there quick. I could hear the panic in his voice immediately. He asked if I was kidding him and mentioned that it was a brand new engine. I told him I knew that, which was exactly why I was worried. I said that he really should get back there and check it out. He said he was on his way, and I could hear him starting to move. I hung up and looked at the 2 police officers who were waiting by the docks. One of them complimented my thinking and said the guy would be back any minute now. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, I saw the guy practically jogging back toward the marina. He was in full panic mode about his precious boat engine. He rushed past the store and headed straight for the docks, where the officers were waiting for him. I followed behind, not wanting to miss this moment. When he got to his boat, he stopped dead in his tracks. There was nothing wrong with his engine, of course, and 2 police officers were standing right next to his boat. One of the officers told him that they needed to have a word with him. He asked what it was about and mentioned that he'd been told there was something wrong with his engine. The other officer explained that they were investigating reports of counterfeit currency being used at the marina and that they were going to need to search him and his boat. The guy's face went white. He tried to play it cool, but you could see the fear in his eyes. He said that he didn't know anything about counterfeit money and called the whole thing ridiculous. The officer told him that if that was true, then he wouldn't mind if they took a look. They patted him down and found his wallet. When they opened it up, I saw what was inside. The thing was stuffed with $100 bills, and they all looked exactly like the ones he'd paid with before. The first officer told him he was under arrest for possession and distribution of counterfeit currency. He started protesting, telling them to wait and saying that he had no idea those bills were fake. He claimed that someone must have given them to him. The second officer told him he could explain that to the judge. When they put the handcuffs on him, he kept protesting his innocence, but nobody was buying it. The officers told us they'd found nearly $2,000 in fake hundreds on him. He continued calling the situation insane and arguing that they couldn't prove he knew the bills were fake. One of the officers explained that using counterfeit money was illegal whether he knew it or not, and that showing up at the same place twice with fake bills didn't look too good for his case. My boss walked up to me when they loaded the guy into the police car. He told me I'd done good work and said that he never thought we'd see that money back, but at least the guy wouldn't be ripping off anyone else for a while. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.